If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me and subscribe to me on all my other social media platforms. Hey, what's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another album review for you guys. This time we're talking about the latest studio offering from one of the pioneers of the Swedish, or Gothenburg more particularly, melodic death metal scene, and that is In Flames with Foregone. So yeah, In Flames, highly influential band. After all, they, along with At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, Hypocrisy, Edge of Sanity, pretty much pioneered melodic death metal in Sweden. Maybe not melodic death metal as a whole, that would be Carcass, but you get the idea. In terms of creating the scene in Sweden, it was In Flames and other bands. Now, full confession here, I've not been a big fan of In Flames, or I've not been as familiar with, the classic stuff, which I know is gonna sound a little bit crazy, but whenever I hear the classic stuff, from the 90s and early 2000s, Horacle, Jester Race, Clayman, Root to Remain, it's I hear these songs, but I think there are much better melodeath bands, not just in Sweden, but in general, better than In Flames. That's just me. And then, their more recent output, pretty much post-2000, post-2000s, have not been very good. And on top of that, it's kind of made me skeptical of really ever listening to In Flames, is because of just the quality has dipped so far, almost to rock bottom territory in recent years. But I was hearing hype about this new album based on the singles. Basically, people were saying they're going back to the melodeath sound, because pretty much ever since post Come Clarity, they've pretty much gone down the route of metalcore and alternative metal. And, well, for mainstream fans, they might dig it, but for the hardcore fans, it's a giant mixed bag, or flat out just hate it. I am definitely one of those guys that did not like the stuff post-2000s for In Flames, at least from what I heard. So yeah, wasn't going into this album with a whole lot of expectation, even based off of the singles. I didn't listen to the singles until listening to this album. And while I have to say, I was a little bit surprised, but at the same time, kind of unsurprised. The first half of the album, the first 6 tracks, had some shine to it. You starting off with The Beginning of All Things That Will End. I thought it was a really beautiful, acoustic, symphonic introduction. Really good stuff going on there. And then you get into State of Slow Decay. That definitely does have moments of classic In Flames. It's thrashy, there's some cool, melodic riffs, some brutal screams going on here, and it's also the only track on the album that doesn't have clean vocals, which, yeah, the clean vocals, from what I heard from other reviews, the clean vocals are definitely going to be a mixed bag for a lot of people, and I'll go more in depth about that later. But then we get into Meet Your Maker, where the beginning starts off in a death metal chug, which was really, really cool, and it kind of, for the most part, stays in a mid-tempo groove. Bleeding Out kind of almost felt like a more melodic Slipknot track. But then you get into the 2-part song, the title track, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 definitely kind of had more of a speed factor, plus of the fact that it was shorter. And then Part 2, they were getting a little bit more bombastic songwriting-wise on that track, but if I had to choose which part I like more, I think I like Part 1 just by a notch, just because it had, in my opinion, a little more heaviness and a little more of that, old-school melodic death metal thrashy speed to it that I really, really like. And then Pure Light of Mind was pretty much like them trying to go for a power ballad track, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't my favorite track of the album. The Great Deceiver kind of brings me back in a little bit, kind of going back more into that classic In Flames Melodeath sound, but still trying to mix in a little bit of what they were doing in recent years. In the Dark, kind of the same thing, a dialogue in B flat minor, kind of a mixed bag track, Cynosure, pretty much in the same breath, and then the final track, In the Transmission, to me was kind of more or less like the most metalcore of the singles of the album. And with all that, you know, like I said, this album, like I kept hearing from people, could this be a return to form for In Flames? Or is it just them trying to compromise for the old school fans and kind of try and bring them back? I would agree with Thralls of Metal in saying that this album's definitely more of a compromise than it is a comeback, because there are some really good songs on here. I am not disputing, there are some really good songs. But there are a few filler tracks, and on top of that, it does feel a little overproduced. After all, it was Howard Benson who produced this album. And also the clean choruses, especially on like the heavier tracks, I feel were kind of not needed. I'm not saying you shouldn't have clean choruses in melodic death metal, but when you have songs that have some heavy riffs, such as tracks like Meet Your Maker, Bleeding Out, The Great Deceiver, you can get away with doing more death metal-centric choruses rather than the clean choruses. I mean, if you're gonna do clean choruses, just don't make them poppy, and that was kind of a problem with this album, was the choruses felt a little too mainstreamy and poppy, kind of like almost like if Breaking Benjamin was singing on top of In Flames, is almost what I would describe the choruses, because Anders, the frontman, he's a good singer, I'm not taking that away from him, he is a good clean vocalist, but the way he projects it on this album definitely feels like it's geared more towards like the mainstream metalcore fan, or the alternative metal fan, rather than the melodic death metal fan. But if there is one major positive, well, actually, before I get that, there are some really catchy riffs on here, and as much as some of the choruses may be a bit poppy, they were at the same time, I have to admit, annoyingly catchy. Like, I almost sang along to some of this a little bit, but the big positive with the album is the addition of Chris Broderick on guitar, because Chris Broderick, phenomenal player, been at Nevermore, and of course Megadeth, and I already knew of his talent based on his performance on the Megadeth album Endgame. So adding Chris Broderick was a good move, and I think he definitely shines on this album in terms of the leads. Like the solos, also along with the riffage for the most part, was the best part of the album. So definitely Chris Broderick, I feel, helped out a lot. But the other best way I could describe this album, I almost compare this album a little bit to Silence in the Snow by Trivium, where that album kind of felt like they were transitioning away from where they were on In Waves and Vengeance Falls, which in my opinion, spoiler alert, if I ever do a Trivium ranking, definitely going to be near the or going to be at the bottom for me. It kind of felt like with Silence in the Snow, whenever they moved away from those two albums and started to transition into where they are now, but with clean vocals, I thought it worked, and it was a good album. It was definitely a transitionary album. Here, I feel it's kind of in a similar boat as Trivium's Silence in the Snow. It feels like they're making an attempt to go into something that feels fresh, even though it's more or less trying to return to form a little bit, but there still needs to be some stuff hammered out. They need to do away with the poppy choruses and the metalcore and the alternative metal bits of the last decade plus, and just get back to what they were good at, which is great harmonized leads, brutal melodic death metal, and just writing killer music. So with that said, with all the pros and cons out of the way, I'm going to give this album a 7 out of 10. It is decent on its own merit. Like, despite the issues that need to be hammered out, this is still a decent album. I'm not saying it's great, nor do I think it's bad. Just, you got quite a few filler tracks on here, but there are some legit really good songs on this album. So, I recommend you guys check it out, form your own opinions, and come back into the comments section below and let me know your thoughts on In Flames Foregone. But until next time, keep your horns high and your dreams wet, folks.